Sephora stores are everywhere you are. So just pop in when you need a brown lip to match your 90s playlist. A confidence boost before your interview? Or a last-minute gift for mom's birthday. There's always a Sephora near you. Just pop in. Use our store locator to find your local Sephora or Sephora at Kohl's.
The challenge is that when you're talking about listening in the way that we were talking about it with whole body listening, it's performative. It's not about really focusing on the listener. It's about focusing on the speaker. And it becomes then compliance and conformity based on a neuromajority model and creating a standard for maybe what we consider typical, what works for, some people. I don't think that type of listening probably works for the majority of people, but that's where our mind goes in terms of creating some of these standards. And when we think about it, focusing on looking at the speaker and sitting still and mouth quiet can actually really hinder listening.
I'm Debbie Reber, and welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. Over the years, countless strategies have been created to help differently wired kids succeed in school and life. But as the neurodiversity movement grows, there's increasing awareness that many of these approaches focus on fitting neurodivergent kids into neurotypical environments and norms, rather than embracing and respecting their unique ways of experiencing the world. Today's guest, Elizabeth Sautter, is a speech-language pathologist and social-emotional learning specialist, and she was initially trained in a more traditional medical model focused on diagnosing and fixing behaviors to promote conformity to neurotypical standards. She co-authored the popular Whole Body Listening Larry series, which aimed to help kids improve listening skills and attention by engaging their whole body. While intended to support neurodivergent students, Elizabeth later recognized that the series was actually reinforcing ableist concepts. Today, Elizabeth is on a mission to promote a neurodiversity affirming, strengths-based approach that emphasizes acceptance and advocating for individualized support. She's been instrumental in updating that book series with a new neurodiversity affirming title, Listen, Learn, and Grow, a whole body listening Larry story to help kids regulate, listen, and engage. As the publisher notes, Listening Larry is back, and he's learned a few things about neurodiversity. Elizabeth, who's also the author of Make Social and Emotional Learning Stick, co-author of the Zones of Regulation children's books, card decks, and games, and part of the Everyday Regulation team, joins me to talk about her journey from traditional speech pathology to embracing a neurodiversity affirming approach. So we'll dive into the story of the Whole Body Listening Larry series, how she responded to critical feedback from the neurodivergent community, and the development of new resources that promote inclusivity and understanding. Plus, we'll also explore what it really means to be a good listener. And as we discuss, Elizabeth's big goal is to replace the original and very popular Whole Body Listening Larry books with the updated neurodiversity affirming version. So if you see those original books in libraries or classrooms, or maybe even on your own bookshelf, we encourage you to swap it out. What I love most about this conversation is how Elizabeth shares her own transformation. Despite years of training in one model, she shifted her thinking. This, to me, is the paradigm shift in action, and I hope you find it as inspiring and motivating as I did. So here is my conversation with Elizabeth Sautter. Hey, Elizabeth, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Debbie. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, I want to thank you for reaching out to me and introducing me to this topic and sharing your story. I think it's such an important conversation we're going to have today, and so relevant to the Tilt revolution and to what we're doing here in trying to change conversations around neurodivergence. So I would like you to kind of kick us off and take as much time as you want, but to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your story and I guess really what brought us to this conversation today.
Yeah, thank you. I think your audience is open to this conversation because of all that you've shared over the years. And it's just been wonderful following you and supporting neurodivergent, differently wired kids. So my background as a professional as a speech and language pathologist, I call myself more of a social emotional coach because I've always been supporting autistic people. And I have had a center in Oakland, California, any Bay Area people out there, a multidisciplinary center of OT and speech and executive functioning, lots of groups. And it was super fun. I grew up in a family of disabilities. My sister was developmentally delayed. I have a cousin with son with autism, and I too have dyslexia. My 2 boys with ADHD and other complex learning differences. So this is all just, a life endeavor for me more than just a profession. But I became very passionate about supporting parents, and especially when they were in our waiting rooms and then when I was a parent myself. And so I'm just grateful for you sharing this information with everybody. What I wanted to talk about was just how I have been really focused over the last few years longer, learning about the neurodiversity movement and how I have been trained as a speech pathologist in the medical model of learning about deficits and disorders and fixing behaviors and challenges, and really shifting to a more social model that's more collective change, neurodiversity affirming, and focuses on strengths, emphasizing acceptance and advocacy and inclusion is what the bottom line is here. And so that's what the neurodiversity movement is about. And something that I've been involved with actually supported ableism. And I was, shocked and appalled, and it set me on a path of deep diving and, like I said before, learning and unlearning so that I can be the compassionate, passionate therapist that I always have been, but in a more conscious, neurodiversity affirming mindset way.
First of all, thank you for sharing that. And I love that you're just saying this is who I was, and I had to really process that. I'm wondering, as you learned about the neurodiversity movement, could you take us a little bit inside your process of doing your own shift? I mean, I think we all do it. Like, I had to do it too. I had to really confront a lot of my ideas that I had, and maybe that I didn't even know were there because I wasn't working in this space. I kind of thrust into this space because of who my child was. But what did that look like for you? I imagine it must have been uncomfortable.
Very uncomfortable. And, I had a lot of shame around what I was learning. And I was always a compassionate therapist in not feeling comfortable with some of the models out there that are more behavioral discipline, behavior modification. And I worked alongside behavior specialists, but we did talk a lot about behavior as communication and the developmental model, and I always brought play into it and following a child's lead. So that was also hard because I sort of had part of it all along, but I didn't have the full picture until the resources that I created that became so popular, the Whole Body Listening Larry resources, which then I can explain that story now, or I can just say when I realized that something that I had put out there was actually supporting ableism, it just took me down like, what does this mean? What are they talking about? And so then I started listening to neurodivergent voices, autistic voices, podcasts like yours, and diving in. And we tried to make changes, but just wasn't enough. So I'll tell you the story of the Whole Body Listening at Larry, if that's relevant now, or it just really was just bringing my awareness. And it took a while though. There's the stages of change where you're unconscious. You don't know what you don't know, to then getting to the 4th stage of change where you're consciously conscious, like you just can't think any differently. But I will never say that I'm that in the world of neurodiversity, because there's always things to learn as I've, know better and doing better, but still there's probably things that I'm blinded to. And so it's a stage of change. And there's a stage of grief too. I talk about in trainings that I do, Kubler-Ross's stages of grief and change. And that was a part of my journey as well, that I'm still on. And now I just feel really compelled to share so that other people can maybe question and get curious about their own mindsets.
Yeah. It's a generous thing to do because it sparks curiosity, right? When we have these conversations, it really invites people to get curious about, how do I really think about this, or where did this come from? So I appreciate that. Let's actually take a break. And then when we come back, I would love it if you could tell us about the original resource that you created and what was behind that.
This episode is brought to you by Jira. Ever wonder how those big marketing campaigns that make headlines get delivered on time? It all starts with Jira, the only project management tool you need to plan and track work across any team. Every step of that campaign is organised in one place, from launching the campaign all the way back to designing ads and writing creative briefs. Get started on your next big marketing campaign idea today in Jira.
This episode is brought to you by United Airlines. When you want to make the most of your vacation, book with United. They're an airline that cares about your travels as much as you do. United is transforming the flying experience with Bluetooth connectivity, screens, power at every seat, and bigger overhead bins to help fit everyone's bag. And with their app, you can skip the bag check line, get live updates, and more. Change the way you fly. Book your next trip today at united.com.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/MBO. Terms and conditions apply.
Okay, so you mentioned before we went to break that you were involved in creating the highly popular whole body listening Larry books that have been used in schools and in homes and with therapists and on and on. So would you tell us about that project, maybe how it came about so listeners really understand what it is?
So in the world of social emotional learning, social emotional well-being, we try to break down a lot of abstract concepts. It's helpful, right? It's, what does respect really mean? And to make it able to understand what we're talking about. And one of those concepts that we were trying to break down was listening. What is really meant? And how many times have we said, pay attention to me, listen to me? And so we were trying to get educators, facilitators, parents to stop saying those things and break down what we're actually asking, which came into whole body listening. And originally it was developed by a speech language pathologist, Suzanne Truesdale, who asked a bunch of first graders, what is listening? And they said, sitting still, eyes looking, quiet mouth, body still, all the things. And so she ended up writing a paper on it back in 1990. And it became very popular. Over the years, other people adopted the heart in terms of caring about what the speaker was saying. And so we started using it in our center, and the kids started to understand what we were talking about in these listening environments when we were saying, pay attention, listen to me. And Kristen Wilson, who's the co-author of the 2 original books and the second book, along with McAllister Wen, who's a consultant. She's the third author of the second book. Kristen Wilson came up with whole body listening Larry on a stick to be teaching in a fun way. And the kids gravitated towards it. So my brains went to write, oh my gosh, we need to make a poster and a book. And so we did. And that's how whole body listening Larry, the poster, the original one, and the books were born. So the original whole body listening Larry poster, I'm holding it up here. I know a lot of you are listening, but it's Larry, large, pointing to all the different body parts, eyes looking, ears ready to listen, mouth quiet, hands still, feet quiet, body faces the speaker, brain thinking, heart caring. So we talked a lot about like turning on and turning off these different body parts. And we have the whole body listening Larry at home and school for parents and educators to use. And then it got really popular. Kindergarten classes, like you mentioned, had the posters up and were using the books and whatnot. And we started hearing that people were saying that Larry was ableist. And I was, whoa, what is that? And like, how is that? How could possibly anything like that be? And, first stage is like anger, defense, all the things. And then I started listening more and thinking about it. I'm like, there's some truth here. It doesn't work for all people to do it that way. Myself included and my kids included and my clients. So we wrote the second edition of the books and we changed the poster a little bit. And I wrote an article, it's a tool, not a rule. And that wasn't enough. And we kept hearing. And I was like, okay, I really need to dive in deeper. And so that's when I started really listening to a lot of podcasts. It was just constantly in my ears, talking to other colleagues, reading and interviewing neurodivergent people. And I got to the point where I just couldn't have my name on the book, And so we went to our publisher and ended up taking it down from the publisher and then revising it. Well, in the middle of that, we had a focus group highlighting autistic adults, explaining how it was for them, and really realizing that the challenge is that when you're talking about listening in the way that we were talking about it with whole body listening, it's performative. It's not about really focusing on the listener. It's about focusing on the speaker. And it becomes then compliance and conformity based on a neuromajority model and creating a standard for maybe what we consider typical, what works for, some people. I don't think that type of listening probably works for the majority of people, but that's where our mind goes in terms of creating some of these standards. And when we think about it, focusing on looking at the speaker and sitting still and mouth quiet can actually really hinder listening because you're focused so much on doing a people pleasing and performance and compliance. And then all you can focus on, and the information is bottlenecked in the brain of just being able to focus on that versus being able to stand maybe and fidget or having different seating options that can help the body and the brain regulate and then open up that bottleneck for true engagement and processing. So that's the journey of going down the unlearning and sort of thinking about this, because I've always been focused on supporting regulation and executive functioning. So when I got that, it made full sense. And so then we created a new poster, was the first. I was just thinking we were going to take it down and move on, but they said, no, we have to have something different. And that's true because other people would still use it. And then they also said that it would be helpful to keep Larry because it's in brand. And then they would, instead of saying like, oh no, if it's, I don't know, something else, they would say, I got Larry, I'm good, versus Larry, I use that. Wait, there's something new, and then help them, no pun intended, listen up. And so the new poster, which again, you can't see, but this is the new poster, which it has Larry in the middle and all the different body parts, the same ones that I mentioned before, but asking, the main thing is whole body listening. How does your body help you listen? And at the bottom, it says all brains and bodies listen and learn differently. It's important to know what works for you. And so then with the body parts, it's asking questions. My eyes help me listen when ... And my body helps me listen when, my ears help me listen when, and there's an open section for then diving in deeper. And we have lesson plans and things like that and blogs that we've written on how to support our listeners in building a toolbox for listening focused on regulation.
It's such a great story. And I'm wondering, when you started realizing I'm getting this feedback, and at first you had this defensive reaction, and then you started to listen and you started talking with colleagues about it. The people in your professional circle who you were talking this over with, did they get it right away as well? Like if we think about systemic change, right? I'm just wondering what that looked like within your own ecosystem or your own professional circle.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I will say it's a spectrum, and it still kind of is. It's moving more towards the spectrum of now we can't see it. It's like a big hill, I kind of analogy, a mountain or whatever, and you can't see around the other side. And now I can't unsee it, but some people are still on their journey of traveling around the other side to see it. And so I sought out consultants who I knew would be helpful in. Becca Laurie was a consultant of mine, and McAllister Wen, who is the neurodivergent teacher. And she's actually an author of the second book, and she helped with the posters. And we have a website now. It's called Everyday Regulation. So she's been a part of that, writing blogs and such. So they were, way far ahead of me and helped me see the other side. And there's some people that are listening and supporting what I'm doing. And then there's some people who are like, I still find benefit in the old books. And that's hard for me to hear. But in the journey, I need to listen and be open to their perspective and then support as I can share information with them and inviting them to come to the workshops and blogs and places that I've listened and really had a change in my mindset. So it's all different, I would say.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You talked about this as being performative, which totally resonated. My kid with pretty severe ADHD, I still have to have an internal dialogue when I'm sharing something important and I'm feeling as if I'm not being heard or seen or paid attention to. I have to remind myself constantly, actually, this is what paying attention to looks like for my kid, right?
I know. And we have older kids. You and I have the same age, older kids with ADHD, but parents also too, thinking about younger kids when a parent might say something like, listen up or pay attention to me. And the kid grabs the Matchbox cars and starts, rolling them back and forth. That maybe get curious about that being a way to regulate themselves so that they can actually listening. And similar to in a classroom, the doodling, or, my son got sent to the office for eating chips in class. And then we had to get that accommodation put on his IEP for being able to have crunchy food, especially in the afternoons. I'm just like him in that way. And so just really being curious when you see some of these looking straight at you and sitting still behaviors that might be actually helping them open up the bottleneck of its cognitive load, theory of just being able to, if they're focusing so much on that performative model, they can't really truly listen. And I invite our audience right now, as I look away, I'm looking outside right now, away from the screen. And, I have my swivel chair right now. I invite everybody to be thinking, like, pause right now. Are you walking? Are you sipping your coffee? Like, what are you munching on something? Like, how do we all listen? And it's just such an important thing for us to be aware of ourselves so that we can get curious with our kids around us.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm always listening to something, and I have to be doing 3 other tasks at the same time when I consume anything if I'm really going to be paying attention. So interesting.
Me too. And I listen to everything. It drives my husband crazy on 2x because the speed, sometimes I get like, if there's too much pause in between somebody talking slowly or long pauses, then my brain goes somewhere else. So it's just like, if it's fast, I keep with it. It's just interesting.
Yeah, totally relatable. Let's take a quick break, and then I want to talk a little bit more about the new book and the new poster, and I have a couple other questions.
Hi, and welcome to IKEA. How can I help?
Oh, my schedule is crazy. I just want some me time.
Maybe it's time to embrace the joy of staying in. With comfortable beds, pillow and decor, mood lighting, and so much more, you can turn your bedroom into the place to be.
Oh, sounds like a dream.
We've got you. Visit us in-store or at ikea-usa.com/sleep to create your dream bedroom today.
Join Capital Group CEO Mike Gitlin for a new edition of the Capital Ideas Podcast. In unscripted conversations with investment professionals, you'll hear real stories about successes and lessons learned, informed by decades of investment experience. It's your look inside one of the world's largest asset managers. New episodes are available monthly. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Invest 30 minutes in an episode today. Published by American Funds Distributors, Inc.
So good, so good, so good.
Just in and so good. Thousands of winter deals are at Nordstrom Rack stores now. And that means thousands of fresh reasons to rack.
Because we get the latest trends for way less.
I've been looking for these.
The best deals go fast.
Save big with up to 60% off Sam Edelman, Sorel, Free People, Kohan, and more cold weather finds. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
Just going back to, as you were sharing what the goal of the original book was, and it took me back to when I was sending my kiddo to preschool. And actually the first preschool lasted about 2.5 weeks. And it was specifically because sitting crisscross applesauce during story time was like a non-starter for my kid. I wrote about that in Differently Wired. I won't go into that whole story, but it was clear to me that the priority was on compliance. It wasn't about being a good listener. It was on compliant behavior and what does a good student look like or a well-behaved student look like. And I'm just wondering, the original book, what was the ultimate goal? Was it about being a good listener? Was it kind of, I guess, integrated with this idea of here's what being a good student looks like?
I don't think it actually had anything to do with that. Our motive was to break down what the heck we were talking about and get people to stop saying, pay attention to me and listen to me. So it was just really like, there's so many abstract concepts what is friendship really? What is respect? all these things in the social world. And so what does that mean when we're talking about it to kids? You go into the schools and you see on the walls of elementary school, especially, citizenship and friend inclusion. What does that mean? So really just like chunking that out and breaking it up so that it makes sense. And there's validity in that. Like, please tell me examples. What are you talking about here? When you're saying, pay attention to me and listen to me, what are you asking me to do? So that was the intention. It wasn't about like, we weren't thinking that it was creating compliance. It was just, we were breaking it down to say, this is what we're talking about here. And so that was the goal. And so that's when like it came turned around, like he was ableist. And we're like, wait, aren't we doing something that's helpful? Like, to make it so that like, stop saying, pay attention to me. That's not helpful. That's actually creating confusion and overwhelm. So we thought we were doing something helpful.
Yeah, of course. That makes so much sense. So I'd love if you could tell us a little bit more. You went over some of the key things in the poster, but tell us more about the Listen, Learn, and Grow book, because I know you want to replace, and we want to encourage listeners too, if you see the original book in classrooms or in places, that there is a new book that we want to replace that one with. So tell us about that.
So we wanted to just do similar format. Larry and some of the characters that were in the original book, Eric Hutchinson's the illustrator, we got him to do it again. He's amazing. And really go through the body parts, but in a different way, really talking about curiosity and exploration of what works and help kids really engage in a different way to learning what works for each of their body parts. So the first one was really like, again, like telling and command and demand. Here, I can read a little bit. The book at home, Larry's sister, Lucy, is looking out the window when mom is talking in the kitchen. And Larry says to her, which, by the way, everybody's called Larry at the rule police because he's the one who kind of breaks it all down. But you'll see here why. Sister Lucy, Larry says, people don't know you are listening when you look at the skies. When you think about others, try to listen with your eyes. So instead of looking out the window, look at mom kind of thing. And in the new book, this is the same, Listen, Learn, and Grow. The pages about the eyes are, your eyes can help you listen by hunting for the clues that show you what you're learning, where to go, and what to do. Looking at the teacher can't always make you understand. Your eyes can look in other places and still learn what was planned. So it just opens up a conversation for different, like it goes through the ears and, having background noise and humming and things like that. And let me just read one of the back pages. Your body helps you regulate to listen, learn, and grow. And when you listen with your whole body, knowledge is what you sow. People learn differently. It's surprising, but it's true. With whole body listening, find out what works for you. So just really focusing on curiosity and exploring all of the different ways that your body can help you listen. McAllister, the consultant we worked with, was just really great in saying, don't throw it out. There's actually some good stuff here. We can just turn it around. And then we also hired a autistic illustrator to create a poster that shows all the different ways. And there's so many more, but some examples of ways that listening can look. So like chewing on something or closing your eyes or doodling, so that these posters can be up for kids to remember that these are some ways that might help them listen and truly engage.
It is such a big reframe, right? You're showing me that poster. Listeners will make sure that you can see an image of it on the show notes page, or we'll redirect you to where you can grab it. But it fills me with a sense of urgency, because I feel like this is information everybody needs access to. Parents of younger kids need access to this, because it isn't the way we have been conditioned to think that listening looks, and it can be so confronting. It can make adults feel they're being disrespected or all of those things, but it's so important. I'm just wondering, what has the response been when you have been out sharing this out in the world with all kinds of different readers and communities?
It's been really good. I was nervous, it's a very scary thing to do, vulnerable, but that's just how we roll and we weren't going to do any differently. So it's important to share an evolution of something that you're part of, even if you see things differently now. And that's part of the story of, again, too, like you can share with kids, like having a growth mindset and to be able to see things and do things differently and unlearn and adjust accordingly and explore what that feels like. And, I understand that teachers would say, this is too much. Like, what am I going to do with a whole bunch of kids standing and wiggling and swaying and whatnot? But with the foundation of regulation, that's how education and kids are going to absorb. It's in a universal design too, that it does work for everybody. And if we can lay the foundation and come up with not only individual toolboxes for listening, but also group and classroom, because it doesn't work to stand in front of your classmate or to throw the fidget around in the air. That becomes a toy, not a tool. And we're still talking about that. That's important. We have to take perspective and think about others, but it is more about advocacy and leaning in to help kids understand really their different learning styles and to create some neuro inclusivity. When I pause in my trainings, I ask them, like, what is your true desire for listening? And, it pauses them to think about, to understand, to get curious, to process. And that doesn't have to do with compliance. So we have to be thinking about how we can really get to that true goal. I really appreciate you saying that this needs to get out there to everybody. It will. It just is a process. And so thank you for being part of that journey. And there's things that we did. I was a kid who didn't have seatbelts. I was, on the floor of the wagon, the wood paneled wagon in the way back.
You're so lucky you had one of those wagons. I wanted one.
Oh, that was so cool. I had the ones that had the flip up in the back, and we would go crazy back there. My dad would pull over. That's a whole nother story. And say, stop, sit down and pay attention and listen, he probably said. But anyway, now we can't even drive our car without the ding, ding, ding going off with our seatbelt. So imagine if you were in a classroom or a home and every time we said something that wasn't neurodiversity affirming or something, we had a ding, ding, ding. But hopefully soon it'll get to be something that's so easily understood that it just becomes second nature to think in this way. And we're just in the beginning process, so it'll take some time.
Yes, agreed. So the audience of the show is primarily parents. Again, we also have educators and therapists and other professionals. But for the parents who are listening, could you share a couple things even that they could be aware of or start thinking about as a takeaway from this conversation, even when they get back from their walk listening to this or whenever they're consuming this show?
I would say first pause. And if there's any sort of feeling of shame or overwhelm about learning new information, just know that that's part of the process and just have compassion for yourself in being here and listening is the first step and just being curious. And then I would say the second step is probably just to observe your child in these listening environments, the dinner table or other times where they're engaging in conversation, and just notice what they might be doing just naturally to help them engage and maybe explore some of that yourself. And then as they go down the path, definitely talk about what works for you and explore your own listening style, and then start to explore advocating. And if you maybe want to have a conversation with teachers about what you're noticing that your child, how they listen, because you are the expert of your child, what they might need to support their listening and true engagement in a classroom setting. And notice maybe they have the whole body listening poster up and you can print out the new one and share it with your teachers. Actually, I partnered with the OT Butterfly. She and I came up with a letter for parents to write to the teacher on explaining and what we're talking about. Yeah. And taking it down and whatnot. And so that can be a start to just engage in these conversations with curiosity. And just, again, you can listen to podcasts too to learn more. And just seek out neurodivergent voices to share information about their journey and potentially how you can learn from them to support your differently wired child.
That's great. I'll just say that modeling piece, especially because so many of us are neurodivergent ourselves, raising these kids, and many listeners are discovering their own neurodivergence because of who their kids are. So I think that modeling piece and talking out loud about the discoveries we're making about ourselves, I've realized that I'm someone who needs to do X, Y, and Z in order to pay attention. So just talking about that stuff out loud, I think can make all the difference in the world for our kids to really start to not only identify and understand that about themselves, but to have no shame around it. It's just who they are, right?
Exactly. And that's what the hope is that it becomes like buckling up in the car, that it's just on the stages of change to get to a place where it's similar to having the ableist sidewalk without a ramp versus now, like that's just unheard of.
Right. Yeah. Let listeners know the best places to learn more about your work and the series.
So the series and the resources and the blogs that we've written with Kristen Wilson and McAllister Wen are on everydayregulation.com. And we're not doing as much over there with social media and blogging. It's hard to manage both. So I'm doing a little bit more on elizabethsautter.com. And I've talked a lot about it on Instagram and leading up to the workshop that we just had on empowering listening and learning, which is available on elizabethsautter.com. Those kind of two places, not to confuse people, but it's hard to keep up both. So Everyday Regulation has it, and so does elizabethsautter.com with a little bit more deeper dive.
Great. And listeners, just so you know, Sautter has 2 T's in it, but I will have a link in the show notes pages for both of those resources. And actually, Elizabeth dropped a bunch of names during the conversation, and I always put any names or books or resources that were mentioned in the course of a conversation. You can always find them in the show notes page. I also just want to encourage you, if you're listening to this, share it with somebody. This is important information that we want to get out. So you can even just text this. If you're listening to it on a phone, text the episode to somebody as soon as you're done listening. So I invite you to do that too. Elizabeth, thank you so much for, again, reaching out to me and letting me know about this. It's really important, and I'm happy to be able to help amplify this message.
I'm so grateful. Thank you for this conversation. I really appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. To learn more about today's guest and the resources we talked about, check out the extensive show notes page on Tilt Parenting. There you'll find key takeaways, links to all the resources mentioned, and even a full transcript of our conversation. Just go to tiltparenting.com/podcast and select this episode. If you're looking for personal support from me and connection with the phenomenal community of parents raising neurodivergent kids, join us in the recently rebooted Differently Wired Club. The new Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Go to tiltparenting.com/club to learn more. The Tilt Parenting Podcast is hosted by me, Debbie Reber, author of Differently Wired and the founder of Tilt Parenting, and was edited by Andrea Curtis Amasquita. To support this show, please join my Patreon campaign where you can set up a small monthly contribution. Just go to patreon.com/tiltparenting to learn more. If you want to follow Tilt on social media, you can find us at @tiltparenting on Instagram and Facebook. And lastly, please take a minute to leave a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. That helps this show stay visible so others can find it more easily. And that's all for this week. Stay safe, stay well, and take good care. And for more information about any of the parenting resources Tilt offers, visit tiltparenting.com.
No one told us the truth about parenthood. Why? This is the podcast everyone needed before they had kids, because now that those little ones are here, there is a lot to unpack. I'm Rachel Shepardota, and I am your host for the podcast No One Told Us, where we tell the truth about parenting and let you in on all the stuff you really should have known about before having kids. I am the founder of Hey Sleepy Baby, but this podcast is so much more than sleep. We'll be diving into all the topics that you really care about and need to know while you do your best job raising those adorable, tiny humans. Our goal is to just make you feel less alone and less overwhelmed. There are so many things that no one tells us before becoming a parent, and I think that we should really pull back the curtain on becoming a first-time or second-time mom or dad to share the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll have a little education, a little fun, and a whole lot of heart that goes into each and every episode. So join me and our amazing guests each week to hear us talk about what no one told us.